following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Back, Golenbock University. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and Peter Golenbock is here. We were talking a little bit off air. Some bad news. A major character in the book that you wrote, Peter, The Forever Boys. And was it The Forever Boys or Forever Boys?
Interesting question.
Okay.
I think it was The Forever Boys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was, as I was saying to Peter, my favorite book of all time. It's how you and I got together, Peter. And Sam Stewart passed away.
Sammy Stewart.
Sammy Stewart. And
Sammy Stewart.
I'm very saddened by that, given everything, and given he was a major part of your book. And
well, he was a very, very sort of interesting character. He had been a very, very fine pitcher with the Baltimore Orioles. He started as a starter. I think at one point he struck out 7 batters in a row. That's how much talent he had.
Wow. And
eventually they had, Jim Palmer and these other fellows who started, and they put Sammy into the bullpen. And he became an important part of their relief staff. The problem with Sammy was that he had a problem with drugs and alcohol. And I think, quite frankly, that was eventually what drove him out of baseball. And so in 1989, when Jim Morley came up with the idea of the Senior League, the idea was going to be like senior golf. So in other words, there was going to be 8 teams in Florida, and the ball players had to be older than 35 years old.
Except catchers, am I correct?
The catchers could be 33.
Okay.
Because catching really took it out of you. So you could be 33 if you were a catcher, but if you were not a catcher, you had to be 35 years old or older.
Okay.
So Sammy came to our team, and jovial, wonderful character, except that he was a drug addict. And I knew he was a drug addict because of a couple of reasons. One, he was always sniffling.
Right.
And the other was that it turns out he secretly started borrowing money from the other players. And at the point where he ran out of players to borrow money from, somebody led on to another that Sammy owes me money too. Oh, Sammy owes me money too. And before you knew it, Sammy owed something like, $4,000 or $5,000 to the other players. And, as a result, you just can't keep a guy on a team like that anymore. And they cut him. And he went home.
That seems like a trivial amount, especially with the money players make today. But back then, in the circumstances these guys were in, that was some big money.
Well, a lot of these guys came to the Senior League because they had 2 reasons. Of course, they loved the game of baseball. They missed playing baseball, something terrible, almost to a man. But the other thing is that, when you leave the game of baseball, chances are you don't necessarily have another skill.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not necessarily want to be a used car salesman. You don't want to, sell real estate. Sammy was one of these people who he was really lost when he left baseball. He was lost.
Yeah.
And so after he left the Pelicans, he ended up being homeless. I mean, it was awful what happened to him.
Wow.
And somehow he got his act back together again and managed to live until last week. He died last week. I don't remember how old he was, 64 or something like that. He wasn't all that old, but I know, just from knowing him with the St. Pete Pelicans, that the rest of his life was not easy.
Yeah. And that kind of life puts a toll on you beyond years.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any addiction. I've discovered about addictions. I've interviewed a lot of baseball players in my life, and whether they have a gambling addiction or a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction, to me, what that word addiction means is that eventually you're going to die.
Early.
I mean, it's serious.
Yeah.
It's something that's serious. Yeah.
Well, may he rest in peace.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. But I have to tell you, the senior league for the year and a half that it was in existence was wonderful. It was wonderful for the fans. It was especially wonderful for the players who were involved. And there were a lot of players involved. We had, say, 20 players. There were 8 teams. So that's 160 former Major League Baseball players who were employed.
Right.
And, you know, a number of these fellows, I came down. It was amazing how it happened. I mean, I happened to be reading USA Today, which was not something that I usually read. But there it was in the middle of the sports section of USA Today announcing that the Senior League was going to hold its opening meeting in Palm Beach at the Breakers Hotel on a certain date. So, and there was a telephone number. So if you wanted to be a player and wanted to play in the league, you should call the telephone number. So I called the telephone number and spoke to, it turned out, the fellow who invented the thing, Jim Morley. I told him I really would like to write a book about the Senior League from the perspective of one of the teams. And he said, great, come on down to our meeting. And so I did. I was living in Ridgefield, Connecticut at the time. The league was going to start November 1st. It was an opportunity for me to get out of the cold of Connecticut,
right.
and I got a book contract. I contacted a publisher who said that sounds like a really fabulous idea, and gave me a book contract to write this book about the Senior League. So I went down to the meeting, and I was very, very impressed with the people there. The owner of the West Palm Beach Tropics was the fellow who owns the Boston Red Sox right now.
Oh.
Yeah. It was before anybody knew who he was. And on the Tropics, Dick Williams, the wonderful Dick Williams, he was going to be the manager. The great Mets left fielder who hit all the home runs, Dave Kingman, he was going to be the left fielder. So I went to the meeting, and after the meeting, I said to the people with the West Palm Beach Tropics, you're the team that I would really love to write this book about. And they said, great, terrific. So I went to a real estate broker, and I rented a house on the water in Palm Beach for 3 months.
Okay.
The next day, I get a telephone call from the PR guy of the West Palm Beach Tropics.
This is after you officially rent the house.
Yeah. After I put the money down. So he says, we don't want you. He says, I was a very good friend of Jim Valvano's. I had just written Personal Fouls, which had gotten Jim Valvano, the coach at North Carolina State, fired.
Right.
And we're concerned that you're not a good person. We don't want you writing about our team. So I called Morley back. I said, Jim, West Palm Beach doesn't want us. I've got this book contract. What should I do? He said, well, I happen to own the St. Pete Pelicans, and I'd be more than thrilled to have you come and write about our team.
Wow. And that's how it
started.
Because it wasn't just the book. That's your entire life. You became a St. Petersburg resident. I mean, it's your home.
We'll get to that. Yes. No, that's exactly what happened. But I was able to get out of my contract. I gave them the sob story about what happened to me. So they ripped up my deposit check on the house in Fisher Island. So on October 31st, I got in the station wagon with my 2 dogs and my wife, my 2-year-old son, traveled to, I didn't know where the hell I was going. I knew on November 1st that the team was having its first meeting in St. Petersburg at a certain place. So anyhow, I drive down. I'm driving down 275, and I see a sign that says last exit until you cross the bridge to Bradenton. So I thought to myself, well, I'd better get off. So I got off something called the Bayway, and I'm driving down, and the sun is going down, and it's 80 degrees on October 31st. And there in front of me is the Don Cesar Hotel, which was pink. It looked like a freaking birthday cake. The sun was setting behind it, and I thought to myself, I've got to be here. I'm in heaven. So I rented a hotel not terribly far away, stayed overnight, and went to the opening day, the first practice day of the St. Pete Pelicans at Stengel Huggins Field.
I know.
Now you know I'm an old Yankee.
Yes.
So here I am going to the first St. Pete Pelicans gathering at Stengel Huggins Field. I'm standing on a field where Babe Ruth hit home runs into Crescent Lake, where Lou Gehrig played, where Mickey Mantle played, where Yogi Berra played, where Joe DiMaggio played. It was like, you've got to be kidding me. So I go inside and I introduce myself to Bobby Tolan, who is the manager of the St. Pete Pelicans. And Bobby Tolan says to me, "We have a problem." So I said to Bobby, "We have a problem? What's the problem?" He says, "The players don't want you around." I said, "Well, don't you understand? I'm writing a book about the senior league and how fabulous it is and how important it is to your players." He goes, "I'll tell you what. I'll let you go and talk to my players. And you tell them what you're doing, and if it's okay with them, then you can stay with the team." And meanwhile, I'm sitting in the chair talking to Tolan, and Doc Ellis, who is both a pitcher and a pitching coach. You know, Doc was about 6'4". He was a huge presence. And he's walking around my desk saying to me, "Loser writer, loser writer, loser." Doc Ellis is taunting me. But I can't be, bothered by any of this because I've got a pretty large contract at stake here. Right. So I walk out, I leave the manager's office and go out into the clubhouse. And Tolan says, guys, this guy wants to talk to you. So I'm standing there in front of, Dick Bosman and John Matlack and Steve Henderson and Roy Howell and Gary Racich and his brother and just, these are players who I knew and revered. But, I have a job to do. So I tell them what the book is about. I tell them this is an opportunity for each of you to tell your story, which is absolutely true. That this is an opportunity, for people to see how important baseball is to you guys, how much you love it, what you mean to each other, and so forth and so on. And then I said to them, and if there's anything that's in this book, I will let you read it first. Nothing I will put in this book I will put in without your permission, which is something I don't ordinarily say to people.
Right.
And at the end of the meeting,
you didn't say that to Valvano, did you?
No.
Just checking.
So at the end of the meeting, everybody's sort of nodding their heads, and I leave. Nobody said come. Nobody said don't come. So the next day, November 2nd, we have to get on the bus to travel to Winter Haven to play the Winter Haven Super Sox in the very first game of the season. I drive my car to the bus, and I'm, with great confidence walking on the bus, wondering if somebody's going to say to me, get off the bus. But nobody did. So I got on that bus, and I had one of the most marvelous 3.5 months that I've ever had in my entire life. I mean, these are wonderful, wonderful people playing this game.
Well, let's take the setting for a second. It's November 2nd. The World Series is over, and baseball is beginning for you. Any great baseball fan is in mourning after the World Series. This league fit a fan's delight. An old, I'm not saying old, person with memories, with
Right.
baseball love. It would be terrific. You imagine now in Florida with what
Yeah.
they're getting for exhibition game tickets and the like, $10 beers in an exhibition game in Florida. It was a league that I think was just too early. For whatever reason, it just didn't catch.
Well,
And
I'll explain to you the reasons when we get to the end of the first year. I'll tell you what happened.
okay,
So we start the season, and we go to Winter Haven to play the Winter Haven Super Sox, managed by Bill Lee. And
Spaceman Bill Lee.
Yes, and on the Super Sox are almost all former Red Sox players. It turned out that every owner and every manager sort of had a different idea of how this league was supposed to work. The St. Lucie team mostly had Mets. The Miami team mostly had Latin players. The St. Petersburg team had the best damn players Bobby Tolan could come up with. He decided
Race didn't matter.
No, race. I don't think race matters. Race wasn't the issue. The issue was in Boston, in Winter Haven, they had Red Sox. So they had, 53-year-old Red Sox, 49-year-old Red Sox. We had guys who were 35, 36, and 37. We had freaking guys who could play.
Right.
We had, the younger you were, the better athletes you were, the better shape you were in, all of that. We had guys. Pat Zachary was one of our pitchers. Dave Racich, Matlack, Bosman, Milt Wilcox. These were younger guys.
Right. Detroit.
We
just came off that Detroit World Series.
That's right. We just ripped up the league. It was just magnificent. I mean, what Tolan wanted to do more than anything else is be a manager in the big leagues. One of the mistakes that Jim Morley made is he made the great center fielder for St. Louis,
Curt Flood.
He made Curt Flood the commissioner, and that was a terrible mistake because Curt Flood had sued baseball and had started the trend towards free agency. It was one of the things that happened before Marvin Miller came in and McNally and Messersmith, and getting rid of the reserve clause and bringing free agency into the game. So he was the beginning of that, and terribly resented by Bowie Kuhn and all of baseball, or whoever even was the commissioner at the time. So baseball did not approve of the senior league. Baseball did not embrace the senior league. They considered it something of an outlaw league because Curt Flood was the commissioner, which was a damn shame. I mean, that was the biggest mistake that they made, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started play, and in the first couple of weeks, players pulled muscles, and there was a certain amount of injuries, and various newspapers and magazines sent their reporters down to sort of poo-poo the league. It just infuriated me. It just made me so angry because this was very important. The Major League Players Association should have embraced this league, just wrapped it up and made sure that it continued forever, and that never happened either, which was a damn shame. But
they could have used that. A portion of that money could have gone to bat-like programs.
Of course.
To help these.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just the fact that some of these guys were making $3,000 or $4,000 a month during the 3 or 4 months that they were playing was enough to keep their heads above water. I mean, it's amazing. Even players who make huge salaries today, I'm told that after 10 years, half of them are broke. they get their money and they buy the very fancy cars and they buy 2 giant houses and they take trips and they indulge themselves and they end up broke.
Do they have to be smacked into, say, a $5 million contract, $10 million? Take $1 million, buy an annuity, and they should almost.
Nobody teaches people how to handle their money. Nobody.
In any profession,
you don't learn
doctors,
it anywhere.
lawyers.
You don't learn it anywhere.
That's
true. You just have to be lucky. You have to be lucky enough to have an agent who isn't stealing your money. You have to be lucky to have an agent who says to you, you're going to take 10% of your money and put it into stocks. That happens some, but it doesn't happen nearly enough. And like I said, 10 years after these guys retire, half of them are broke. So at any rate, the Senior League provided not only, fabulous competition, not only wonderful competition for these players, but it gave quite a few of them a living, which was really neat. So we go through the season and we're winning games and it's so much fun. And halfway through the season, we're playing a game in West Palm Beach against the Tropics. And John Henry, he's the owner of the Red Sox now.
Right.
John Henry comes over to me, and he says, we'd really like you to write this book about the Tropics. This is halfway through the season, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, for crying out loud. And I said to him, I would have loved to. You were the team I wanted to do it about, but, you kicked me out. So, it's too late. It's just too late. And it's interesting because I wonder, now that he went and bought the Red Sox, whether that would have given me an entree to, some more books about the Red Sox. At any rate, it was fine.
See, that's, Peter, I don't understand it. All these teams, like your Tampa team, you told me stories about you did a little writing for them at the beginning.
I did, yes.
And what I don't understand, I know you as a person. I'm not talking as a person. I'm talking as the name Golenbock, Bums, Dynasty, what have you. That would be a ticket for them. That would be it would give them some legitimacy. It was a ticket for them for 5 years until they decided they didn't want to spend the $500 that they were paying me to write these articles, that they could do it through an intern. So to give up $500.
This is baseball. This is the way professional baseball works. You got to understand.
Yeah.
This is what happens. This is just what happens. I had a contract, a very nice contract. I was going to do a book with Joe Madden about the Rays, about how fabulous the team was and how well we were doing. And management squashed it.
Whoa.
They were afraid we were going to somehow reveal their almighty secrets. It was bizarre. It was absolutely bizarre. So we never wrote the book.
That kind of thinking, there is no, and it remains no book about that part of baseball history.
Well, not only that, but you'll never see a book about the Rays.
Right, you would have. Right, you would have.
You would have had a national. Right.
How many fans would that bring in? Kids could 20 years from now, kids could be a Rays fan and know the history of the Rays. Just like kids today grow up, know the history of the Yankees and the Dodgers through your books.
I went to Andrew Friedman. Andrew Friedman was the head of the Rays at the time. He's now with the Dodgers. I went to Andrew and I said, look, this book will give the Rays national attention.
Of course.
Why wouldn't you want us to do it? And he said, I'm sorry. We've put our foot down. No. And that was it. Once they say no, it's no. I can't, Madden is making, his $812,000 a year. He's not about to risk that on a book paying him $100,000. That's not going to happen. So we never did it.
Wow.
So that's just some of the things that happen. With the Pelican players, we had a catcher by the name of Butch Benton. Butch Benton was 33.
He was a Met farmhand for a while.
He was the number 1 draft pick of the Mets. And then he had, I think, physical problems. But at any rate, in the senior league, he was clearly the best catcher in the league. He was marvelous. He hit 320, 325, something like that, and was the anchor of our pitching staff. And after the season, he actually went and played for the Chicago Cubs AAA team. And what infuriated me is that they refused to bring him up. And I do believe they refused to bring him up because the major leagues didn't want a senior league player playing in the majors. And that would have been a wonderful thing for Butch to be able to play in the major leagues, if only for the month of September.
Right.
But
if only for a cup of coffee.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But they would not bring him up. They wouldn't do it.
Did he ever get his cup of coffee with the Mets? Is big a Met
with the Mets?
Yeah.
I
wonder if he got.
No, I don't think so.
He
was one of those who failed. It's one of those failures, you know.
Right.
And a lovely, lovely guy. He had like 8 kids. He was very religious. He was a very, very nice man. And he played
if you could
great baseball.
Just being a professional baseball player, you're not a failure. If you're signed, you're
right.
a world. I mean, just putting it into perspective, he's a world-class athlete. What kid would not have given his left nut to have his career as incomplete as it was? So
that's right.
But it would have been nice to have his name in the baseball encyclopedia. But I can see how baseball would be vindictive that way. They're vindictive to the 500-plus players who did come up for a cup of coffee and are denied pension benefits.
Yeah, well, this is an issue. A fellow by the name of Doug Gladstone has been pushing.
Doug Gladstone is going to have a podcast show on this network. We've been
excellent. He should.
He
absolutely should.
He and Skip Lockwood. Did you have when you wrote your book on the Mets? Did you know Skip very well?
I didn't know him at all. I mean, certainly know who he is. He was a relief pitcher who threw a sinker. I remember Skip Lockwood, but he was not. You know, when you're writing a book, you can only, you can interview 50 people. You can't interview 100 of them. Otherwise, the book would be 1,200 pages long.
Right.
But we had Mets. We had Steve Henderson.
Steve Henderson, who came to
the Mets in the Tom Seaver trade, and we had the other Met. We had Pat Zachary, who was to replace Tom Seaver after that trade.
Well,
they both came from
pressure
Cincinnati.
That had to have invoked in that city.
And that was the joy. That was the joy of writing that book, to know those people and have them trust me enough to tell them their very, very intimate stories. Lenny